It's the Growing for Market podcast.
It was like beginning of year 4, and I started to see this beautiful mycelium in our soil. And in the university, I had always heard like, oh, you got to till your soil to this fine tilth, right? And like I had the opposite. It was opposite, right? It was just these beautiful aggregates, like this pebbly soil substrate. And things started growing differently. And I was like, oh my gosh, right? Weeds, pests, and diseases all started to subside. It's like, I think I've said this phrase so many times, like the pieces of the ecological puzzle started to come together. And yeah, it took some time, and I stumbled a lot along the way, and what a beautiful journey it's been.
Hello, and welcome to the Growing for Market podcast, where we talk about growing, marketing, and the business of growing vegetables and flowers for local markets like farmers markets, CSAs, farm stands, and local wholesaling. I'm Andrew Mefford, your host and the editor of Growing for Market magazine for 34 years, the magazine for flower and vegetable market farmers. If you're enjoying the podcast, just wait till you see the magazine. Go to growingformarket.com for more. Also, if you could give us a follow and a rating, it really helps other like-minded people find the podcast. And now, let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Are you tired of breakdowns and not knowing if your old Farmall or LSG will start? Consider the Tillmor Super E, the electric cultivating tractor built for market growers. With up to 8 hours of runtime, the Super E uses a 48-volt electric system that's quiet, easy to operate, and dependable. You'll love the high clearance and clear view of your rows, perfect for cultivating, fertilizing, and planting with precision. And here's the best part. It starts at $19,500, and that includes one battery, charger, and everything you need to start using it right away. No gas, no noise, no constant repairs, and cheaper to operate than a gas tractor. It delivers reliable power that reduces manual labor and keeps your crew motivated. Learn more and see the Super E in action at tillmor.com.
Hey, it's Lindsay from Grown By. There are a lot of farm sales platforms out there, but there's only one that's cooperatively owned by farmers, and that's Grown By, your all-in-one solution to simplify farm sales. I'm proud and excited to share 2 new features now available on top of the tools you already know and love. Number 1, our customizable CSA box builder. It allows your customers to simply say what they'd like in their share, and Grown By matches their preferences with your weekly harvest. Number 2, our new wholesale-only marketplace. Developed with the Culinary Institute of America, it makes your life easier with a dedicated shop for your wholesale customers. No more texting those chefs. Combining retail and wholesale inventories and records. And, drumroll, automatic payments on due dates. No more chasing down late payments. These new features sit alongside our popular online sales and traditional subscription CSA tools, making it easier than ever to manage your farm's business. As you start to get ready for next season, we'd love to hear from you and see if our cooperative can be a partner in growing your farm. Visit us at grownby.com. That's GROWNBY.com.
Today, we have the pleasure of welcoming Jen Aron to the Growing for Market podcast. Jen is an agroecologist and owner of Blue Raven Farm in Corbett, Oregon, where she grows vegetables for a CSA program. Jen also worked as a farm educator for 7 years with Oregon State University Extension. About 5 years ago, Jen wrote 4 articles for Growing for Market magazine talking about how she built her farm on raw land east of Portland, Oregon, focusing on creating a healthy soil ecosystem and dealing with a whole slew of pest and disease problems along the way. If you haven't had a chance to read her articles, we're making the one about establishing her farm public and linking it in the show notes if you want to read it. And if there's a thread running through Jen's work and her articles, it is both the wonder and the power of healthy soil to grow healthy crops and to deal with a lot of the challenges we have in farming through soil-based solutions. So I wasn't entirely surprised to hear that Jen recently went through an intensive 650 plus hour agroecology course with Nicole Masters, which has completely reshaped how she approaches on-farm consulting, education, nutrient applications, biology, soil testing, and weed management. So I'm really looking forward to this conversation, both to catch up with Jen and see how Blue Raven Farm is doing at the decade mark, and to hear about how she's applying what she learned to her farm and helping support other farmers in their soil health journey. I know soil life is hard to study because most of it is invisible to the naked eye, but it seems like there's a lot of progress being made right now with learning about soil and how it has the power to affect the results we get as farmers. I'm so excited to talk with someone who is both learning about the power of healthy soil and putting it into practice. So without further ado, welcome to the podcast, Jen.
Thank you so much. I'm so excited to be here. Thanks for carving out time and for doing all that you do. Growing for Market is such a fabulous and such an important resource for farmers. I'm a huge fan and love the podcast. So thank you so much for having me.
Oh, great. Well, thank you so much. Yeah, it was an important resource. Growing for Market was, as my wife and I were coming up through the farming ranks, we apprenticed for a bunch of other farmers. And so that's why when the opportunity to take it over came up, we said yes. So I'm glad.
Incredible.
Thank you. And I really enjoyed your articles for the magazine. So keep us in mind. I think this is going to be fun. But yeah, actually doing this interview, I went back and reread your articles, and there's just so much good information in there. And also there's so much emotion, like particularly the article that's linked down in the show notes about starting your farm. Like, it sounded like there were some rough times there as far as pests, diseases, just like, yeah, it counted a lot of adversity, which like is part of the experience of being a farmer. Like, I don't know, some of your situations were very rough. You write about having crops almost taken out due to different things, which I think we're going to get to in a minute. But I think that's something that a lot of people who've trying to grow something at some point can relate to. It's just, it very rarely goes to plan. That's part of the deal with being a farmer, I think, is like figuring out what you do when plan A doesn't work out, finding that plan B. And so I think that's part of the value of, your articles talking about the problems that you encountered and how you dealt with them.
I love that. The importance of the pivot, right?
Yeah, farming could be like pivoting. It's like pivoting a lot of the time. So
Professional pivoting.
Yeah. But I'm so excited for this conversation because it seems like there's a lot of interest and also a lot of progress on soil health right now. I feel like I've always heard the feed the soil to feed the plant kind of thing at organic farming conferences, but just the number of research projects, the amount of interest and findings relating to soil health that are actionable for farmers. It seems like there's just a lot of all of that right now. So is it just me, or are we in a soil life learning revolution right now?
Yeah, it's beautiful to see. When I caught the soil bug a decade ago, that information was few and far between and really hard to come by. And now I don't know if it's because of the algorithm on my computer, but that it's just everywhere. Like, I'm always getting fed new information in my inbox, or depending on how I search something on Google, it's soil health and it's there and it's really forward facing, which is great. That said, I think that we still have a long way to go. And I love to be positive about it. It's come a long way in 10 years, Andrew. So you're absolutely right. I'm so thrilled to see that.
Yeah, well, I'd say so. I mean, I'm guessing there's two things going on here. One is that I know there was this very reductionistic sort of like conventional agriculture idea that, like, there's this quote I heard one time, I'll have to track it down, by someone basically saying like, soil is just there to keep the plants from blowing away. It's the like, you can do everything through synthetic fertilizers, basically like the soil life doesn't matter kind of perspective. And so I think people are realizing that, I mean, particularly I think organic agriculture practitioners have understood this for a long time, that soil is an important part of cycling the nutrients to your plants, and that if you do a good job of that, then you don't have to rely on conventional or synthetic fertilizers. But I think the second part of that is just that I'm guessing that the like microscopes and technology to allow us to look at the soil life, right, has come a long way. So I'm guessing, it's both people are realizing it's important, and now people have better tools for studying it. I mean, because I feel like I'm seeing a lot of work, a few years ago, Jesse Frost's Living Soil Handbook came out. That's a whole book about the topic, and it just seems like Elaine Ingham has been doing it for years, but it just seems like the pace and the significance of the discoveries that I'm seeing for soil health, it just seem to be picking up, which is amazing when you think about that. Should all be giving more tools to farmers to give them control over their soil, or maybe not control is the right word, but to be able to work with their soil and rely less on outside inputs to keep their crops growing well. So
yeah.
Okay, soil health, but let's talk about Blue Raven Farm. I know you founded it in 2016, so this would be the big 10th anniversary for you. Congratulations.
Yes. Thank you.
And you documented, I think it was the first 5 years of your farm in the article that you wrote for Growing for Market back in 2021 called Microbes for Land Repair, a 5-year eco farming trial, which is the one that's in the show notes in public right now if people want to read it. So that was the first 5 years of your farm. And can you tell us where you're at with the farm now, and also about your work with Oregon State Extension? I know you were working with Extension when you started your farm. So if you want to take those two parts of your experience together or separately, that's up to you. But can you tell us a bit about your farm and the circumstances where you started it?
Yeah, so my farm beginnings were in 2011 with Oregon State Extension Service. I was educating beginner farmers in a urban, 1 acre plot in the city of Portland, and taking growers, growers who were excited to learn, and through the full gamut of how to grow. So from how to start a seed, how to pack a propagation tray, how to crop plan, how to go to market, everything. And 15 years ago, and working for the university system, even though we, as you mentioned, like we were growing organically, and it was still relatively rigid. It was very much cover crop, till, and then NPK applications based off of your soil test, maybe some compost applications, right? And so that was the course that we had laid ahead of us, and we farmed that way for many years, and things were okay until they kind of didn't. And through this program, we had the opportunity to visit lots of other farms, and hearing farmers and having this incredible moment to be on other farms and hear farmers talk about their struggles, I was seeing again and again this trend where farmers were spending a lot of time talking about their tillage equipment. And then we were going out touring the farm, and I was like, dang, this is rough. Farmers are spending a lot of time and resources in weed management, and I just feel like it's a losing game. And so I kind of tucked that away in the back of my mind as this feels problematic, and I wonder if there's a solution to this. And then it really wasn't until my last year with Oregon State, and my apprentices were off at a program that we have here called Small Farm School, and where they learn for a day. It's amazing. And yet the day fell on a harvest wash and pack day. So I'm like, okay, well, I guess I'll do harvest wash and pack on my own. That was normally something that we all did together, and the students led the charge on that. And so I'm doing the thing, and I get to this bed of beets, and I'm pulling up these beets, and it's just black corky spot after black corky spot on these beets. And I'm just like, wow, this is a boron deficiency. And what was profound about that moment, Andrew, was that we had done extensive tissue analysis. We had done soil analysis. We had amazing access to the soils department at Oregon State. And I had expressed some frustration that we were struggling on our farm, and they didn't really have an answer. And yet here I am, I'm pulling out these beets that were clearly deficient. I called my supervisor. I'm like, hey, what's up with these beets? He's like, I don't know. And it's such an important part of the story, because packed up for the day, was driving back to Corbett. Blue Raven was in its infancy. Like, we were in our first year of production. I hadn't really carved out this niche of being, this ecologically focused farm. And so I'm driving home, and I'm just like, gosh, like, what's up with these beets? And I just had this phrase come to me so clearly, and it was microbial deficiency. And to this day, that's not even a phrase that I've really ever heard before. And I went home, and I was like, what does this mean? I know there's biology in the soil, but like, that's, and again, like, this is 10 years ago, and information wasn't really there. So did a deep dive, and I was like, wow, what I think is happening is that I think we have this wrong. And I think that it's biology that is driving the system and not chemistry. And so from that moment, like my whole everything shifted. And I have been obsessed with soil ever since, just trying to learn from whoever I can learn from and do a lot of trials. And so we started Blue Raven Farm. I tagged it as ecologically grown. I didn't really know what else to call it at that point. I was just like, I just want to do like this whole system ecology. And basically just like we joked about, like pivot, right? Like it's not, the system's not working. So let's do a 180-degree pivot. So rather than tillage, I went no-till. And I went pretty extreme. I've really come back to center a little bit on tillage. We can talk about that later. And yes, I wrote in the article, like the first couple of years were rough. The land had never been farmed before. And right out of the gate, we had pests, we had disease, we had weeds. And my mantra at the time was just trust and stay the course. And as I started to get a little more vocal about what we were doing, what we were trialing, gosh, farmers were coming out of the woodwork and being really critical, very openly critical about what we were doing. I'm like, goodness, I guess haters are going to hate, right? And like, I feel like that fueled me in a way because I'm just like, gosh, if I'm agitating these farmers, like I must be doing something right.
You must be onto something.
I think I'm onto something, Like here's this like strong, smart, female that's like doing something outside the box, and it agitated people. And I was like, I think I'm on the right track. Which is hilarious. And so anyway, yeah, it was like beginning of year 4, and I started to see this beautiful mycelium in our soil. And in the university, I had always heard like, oh, you got to till your soil to this fine tilth, right? And like, I had the opposite. It was opposite, right? It was just these beautiful aggregates, like this pebbly soil substrate. And things started growing differently. And I was like, oh my gosh, right? Weeds, pests, and diseases all started to subside. It's like, I think I've said this phrase so many times, like the pieces of the ecological puzzle started to come together. And yeah, it took some time, and I stumbled a lot along the way, and what a beautiful journey it's been.
Yeah. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. A well-built high tunnel is one of the smartest investments a small farm can make. It protects your crops, extends your season, and keeps income rolling in even through winter. Nifty Hoops builds complete Gothic high tunnels that are easy to install and built to last. Their easy, bolt-together construction makes setup straightforward and efficient, whether it's a small backyard hoop house or a dozen large production-scale high tunnels. Especially through their community build option, where professional builders work alongside your crew, family, or neighbors to build each structure, usually in a single day. Most growers go with Nifty's full setup: steel-framed end walls, roll-up sides, baseboards, double plastic with inflation, automated vents, and real doors, all priced to make the best choice the easy one. Nifty is a small crew out of Michigan using U.S. steel and working hands-on with growers across the country. They'll help evaluate your site, handle NRCS paperwork, and if they're building with you, they'll even float your cost share until after the build. Visit niftyhoops.com to learn more. Farm more seasons. Grow more food. Nifty Hoops. Today's episode of the Growing for Market podcast is brought to you by BCS America. On our farm, we've had our BCS two-wheel tractor for over a decade, and with no belts to slip, its all-gear-driven construction is still going strong. Though we originally got it for rototilling, we kept it even when we went mostly no-till because it can do so many other things around the farm. From snow blowing, to making raised beds with the rotary plow, to chipping wood, it can do just about anything you might need on a farm with the right attachment. Need to shred a cover crop? A BCS flail mower will make quick work of even the most vigorous cover crop and chop it up so it breaks down quickly. Want to stir in compost or amendments without inverting soil layers? A power harrow turns your BCS into a precise tilthing machine with depth control so you don't mix deeper than you want to. With so many attachments to choose from, it truly is the Swiss Army knife of farm implements. It's why, instead of saying two-wheel tractor, so many people just say BCS. Tractors and attachments are on sale through the end of the year. Visit bcsamerica.com to find sale pricing and your nearest dealer. And now, back to the show. I'm sure there was a lot of, well, I know you write about the adversity in the article because you were also running a farm. You know, this wasn't just like an experiment, let's see what grows. You had CSA customers and everything.
Absolutely.
Can I ask you about a few of the pests and disease that you dealt with over time? Or is there another, I don't know if that would be the best way to proceed, or if you want to say anything else about the starting of Blue Raven, because it was sounds like it was like logged or clear cut or something, like it was going from like a forest. Like I'm imagining they cut it over and then just sold the land. And so you're basically like starting from scratch.
Yeah. So I can see how there would be that visual, and it had been clear cut, but we moved here maybe 10 years after that. So the land had really settled. Wasn't this like freshly clear cut land.
Oh, okay.
But if you look at an aerial on our farm, like we're just like this little this little clearing in the forest. It's hilarious. You know, we are not in like a great ag soil, which makes our story like even maybe more profound, I guess.
Right, because you made, I mean, like you talk in the article about cover cropping and all the things. So like you basically made your soil, right? I mean, I'm assuming most forest environments aren't, I mean, I'm sure there are some on the prairies or something, although there's a lot of forests on the prairies, but I'm sure there's some forest environments where you could cut down the trees and be ready to grow. But it sounded like you had to make the soil that you wanted.
Yeah.
To have that farm. Yeah.
Yeah, it's cool. It's so cool to look back at photos and see. We did do a deep plow when we first got here. The compaction was pretty fierce. And you can just see the subsoiler like pulling up this red earth, right? Just like does not look like ag soil at all. And as you look at photos throughout the years, you can see the soil getting darker and darker. The pH here was like 4.85 when we moved here. Soil organic matter was really low. We were at like a low 5. And so, yeah, so dealing with all of those things right out of the gate, and then just watching things sustain themselves very, very beautifully as the ecology stays the course, right?
Yeah, yeah. Okay, so you moved the land and you cover cropped it, and were, like you said, you did an initial tillage, but yeah, you talk about you are trying not to till other than that initial tillage, and we're relying on tarping and stuff like that a lot. I was looking at your articles again before our interview, and you were talking about how, I think it was the 4th year where you had tarped the soil. It looked so nice. And then when you pulled that tarp up and planted a bunch of stuff, and then was it voles or gophers? Some little rodent was just like, you realize that they like to live under there, and they just like ate like half your crop within days.
Voles.
Voles. Yeah.
Voles.
Okay.
Yeah.
Voles.
Do y'all have voles?
Yeah, we have voles.
Yeah. Okay.
Yeah. We see them under tunnels, but also in hoop houses and greenhouses. I mean, they're just like, yeah, they love to live in the hoop houses and greenhouses here, and they're just really hard to control. So I think you got over the voles, and then everything started going down to symphylans.
Yeah, we had horrible symphylans.
So look, I'm very happy to say we do not have symphylans in Maine. I've talked with growers in Oregon, some other growers in Oregon, actually. I mean, I know it's not just Oregon, and they sound like a nightmare. And so in the article you talk about, so you were talking about how, well, okay, I'd like to ask you, this is a 2-part question. To tell us what exactly symphylans are, because I forget. I mean, they're not insects, but so if you could tell us what the symphylans are, and then so the issue is that when they're a problem, they eat the roots off of plants, causing them to die in the field. And in the article, you talk about how you read something by Dr. Elaine Ingham talking about how she thought that symphylans really what they want to be eating is fungus. And so in the article, you say that you went and found some compost that really didn't sound like very good compost, actually. You said you were looking for a compost with a high woody component. And in the thought, you were basically, it was an experiment, right? Trying to see if what Dr. Ingham said about symphylans really wanting to eat fungus more than plant roots would work. And I think in the article you said that worked. And so that 5 years more along, can you tell us what symphylans actually are? And is that approach still working for you? Basically feeding them something they want to eat more than your plant roots.
You know a lot about symphylans.
I've heard.
Well done.
Even though we don't have, I talk to growers for all over the country. And so I've heard a lot about symphylands from people in the Pacific Northwest.
Yeah, so they're a microarthropod. They live in the soil. They're a soil dweller. I don't think there's any way to eradicate them. And you're absolutely right. They can be the bane of your existence. They love newly transplanted transplants or seedlings, those little fine roots. They'll just go to town and eat those. So yeah, you're right. I am an avid researcher and love to read and just love to go down those rabbit holes. And I found this really obscure, it was called the Soil Zine. That's how old it was. It's from like the 90s, right? And Elaine Ingham,
I remember
right?
zines.
Oh my gosh, right? So Elaine Ingham, she wrote this. I found this link to this soil zine where she talks about symphylands, and exactly like you said, that they prefer to eat fungi, and as a last resort, they'll eat your plant roots if that's not there. So yeah, you recounted the story beautifully. I don't want to go through it, but yeah, I just tried to mimic that. So I know that fungi they need a woody substrate or food source. So, trying to find a compost that was somewhat composted, but still had a lot of woody material. And it really helped. I wouldn't say that it eradicated them perfectly, but what felt like a devastating situation, like all of a sudden the plants were growing better. And, just like keeping that in mind, that isn't something that I added to the soil year after year after year. But symphylands, I don't know if you know this, but you tend to have hot spots on the farm. They're not necessarily everywhere and in every bed all the time, but you tend to have these hot spots where they're concentrated. And so I was able to figure out where my hotspot was at Blue Raven. And so try different things. I have chickens on the farm, so I would take the chicken coop bedding and put that over the beds during the winter and then grow potatoes the next year, which there's been some research that is both positive, like showing efficacy and not being so effective for farmers, where if you grow potatoes, you get a reprieve year following those potatoes from symphylands. And I have some growers that say, yeah, that works. Some others that are like, no, it doesn't. So I just kind of threw everything I had at it. And honestly, what's really cool, Andrew, is that as our soil microbiome has matured and has this resiliency, they're just not a problem. We just cohabitate with them. And I've spoke with Elizabeth at Singing Frogs Farm, who also has struggled with symphylands, and we had a little back and forth. And she was like, hey, I know you had symphyland issues, we did too. What'd you do? And we basically came to the same conclusion that as you repair the soil ecosystem, that all the critters in the soil are mitigating that and get that pest and keeping them in balance. Does that make sense? Did I explain that all
right? Yeah, that's great. Quick follow-up question is just that if you were trying to help somebody with a symphylands problem right now, would you say putting down some compost with a fungal component is the short-term solution, and the long-term solution is just encouraging those fungal populations in the soil by things like tilling less and other things that people can do to encourage a fungal population in the soil? Is that the short? Is that how you go about it?
Yeah. And honestly, I don't know if I would necessarily advocate for the adding of the fungal compost, just the labor. I'm really working to scale up soil health and all of these things. And it's just for a small space, that's great. I have a whole symphyland protocol that I talk with folks about, there are certain crops that are really susceptible to symphylands, and especially in the spring, symphylands tend to be a lot more aggressive. They like that wet soil. And here in the Pacific Northwest, it seems to be problematic. So growing larger transplants, right? So it just takes longer to get that damage and cause death. So that's one. And yeah, there's a cost to that. And I'm aware of that. When you transplant, giving each transplant a little bit of a hug or a nudge into the soil, because the symphylands, they aren't able to move through the soil medium very well. So if you compress the airspace around your transplant, the symphylands are going to have a harder time getting there.
Oh, okay. I didn't know that.
So that's another one. And then just the overall piece, of course, is just like, how do you move the soil health needle in a positive direction? So many agricultural soils are bacterial dominated. So just thinking about that, what are the things that you can do to help move that fungal to bacterial ratio to like a 1-to-1-ish or whatever? And there's a lot of people who agree or disagree with that. And I'm not here to say that's the absolute way, but it's just something it's all part of the story, right?
Yeah, okay. I think that's good. Actually, a question just occurred to me, and it plays into exactly what you said about, I've heard that the same thing, that agricultural soils, and I think it's particularly agricultural soils that are tilled a lot, tend to be more bacterially dominated. And there must be some kind of testing protocol. Like, how do you know how, like, I know that the soil food web people with Elaine Ingham spent a lot of time with microscopes. I think that's part of the training. Actually, yeah, we had a guy who had gone through the soil food web school just a couple months back, and he was talking about all the microscope stuff that he does. So would that be, I guess my question is, how do you tell if a soil is more bacterial or more fungal, or you like how, like basically, if you want there to be a good fungus in the soil, how do you, for synphylans or just for soil health reasons, how does one gauge that?
Such a great question. Oh, I'm a huge fan of just like, how can we do this work without sending things to the lab? Because there's an expense there. So I'm always like, right out of the gate, I'm like, what are some visual indicators? And weeds are a really profound first indicator. And certainly the type of weeds that you have. And so many weed species thrive in a bacterial dominated soil. An example would be the pigweed or the lamb's quarters. Those Amaranthaceae crops or weeds tend to be very bacterial dominated. So that's one thing that you can look at, and something that when I am working with a farmer at their farm, like taking in a weed assessment is one of the first things that I'm doing, just to see like what's growing, because all of those weeds are telling a story. In lieu of that, if you're seeing mycelium in your soil, that's a big one. As we know, you think about the soil and the mycelium in the soil, like this massive web, right? Like a spider web that's really delicate, right? You know what happens when you walk through a spider web. It like gets in your eyes and your face and it's a mess, but it breaks down very, very quickly. And so that's the same with the tools that we're using to cultivate or to till or to break up compaction, so that ecosystem is fragile, and it's one of the more fragile ecosystems. So if you're doing a lot of tillage, you're going to see that in your soil structure. Gosh, I am obsessed with the soil aggregate. There's so much to talk about with the soil aggregate, that really beautiful piece of soil that's held together by biology. And those larger aggregates are held together by fungi. So if your soil is missing that, like that's a really amazing, just physical thing that you can see without taking your soil to the lab. There is a lab test called the PLFA test. It stands for phospholipid fatty acid test, and they'll give you a fungal to bacterial ratio in that test. I'm honestly I want to say that Haney, I don't think the Haney does do a fungal to bacterial, but don't quote me on that. But the PLFA does, and that's a really cool test that doesn't require somebody sitting at a lab counting bacteria and fungi. So yeah, that's one way that you can do it. And it's nice to just have that as a baseline, as a test that you can do every 3 years and start to monitor, is my soil moving in the right direction?
Okay, cool. There's some nice pictures of mycelium in your article.
Yes.
So once again, if people don't have a good mental picture of mycelium, check out the article in the show notes. So just to make sure I've got this right, what I've always been told is that bacteria are so much smaller than mycelium, right? Like, you can't see bacteria with the naked eye, whereas when it's there, you can see mycelium. It is like you said, it's like a light, when you're pulling apart a soil aggregate where there's mycelium, it does look almost like a spider web or something. There's these, like, I've heard mycelium described as fungal roots, not a perfect analogy because they're not actually roots, but, like you think of it as a root system or the spider web, that connects how the fungus engages with the soil. So what I've always been told is just that because the mycelium is so much bigger than bacteria, when you take a plow, rototiller, anything through the soil, more bacteria are going to survive, whereas that mycelium are just going to get churned up. It's basically like curtains for the mycelium. I mean, that's one of the reasons why agricultural soils tend to be bacterial dominated.
Correct.
Okay. I just want to make sure, because, in case people were like wondering why, and that's what I had always been told. And I just wanted to see if that's what you thought. Okay.
You're totally right. And I love the visual. And it's really important to note that most fungi in the soil is not visible to the naked eye.
Okay.
Yeah. So the mycelium is like joined together threads of lots and lots of fungi, which is why we can see them. But most of it is invisible. So like the mycorrhizal fungi that I think is well known in the farming community at this point. Like you can't see that with the naked eye. You need a microscope. Yeah, so it's all about, I think it's these, you mentioned it, like what is the challenge of studying soils? Like, well, it's invisible, we're talking about these invisible beings.
Okay, well, that's good to know also that there's a fungal component that you can't see also, but that the mycelium is a good indicator if you can see it. Okay. I'm trying to think of what, things that are actionable for people. In the article, you talk about how by following your system, you got weed pressure really low. Like you've got these pictures of like carrots or something. And, like this bed has never been weeded. And you can see there's like one little weed germinating. But it's like, yeah, it's notable for how many weeds are not there, really. Can you tell us a bit about how you worked your weed pressure down over time?
It's probably the one question I get asked the most. And it's the one observation I think that when folks come to Blue Raven, they're just like, where the heck are the weeds? And I think that it's multifaceted. I think that and the more that I learn and start to unravel this, the ecological puzzle that's happening, it's just like, you're changing the conditions of your soil. So in a soil that is heavily disturbed, it's agitated, it's angry, right? What are weeds? Weeds are incredible storytellers, right? They are these dynamic accumulators of excess. They're indicators of deficiency. I don't know. I might write an article for Growing for Market about weeds, right? Because like they have such a, if you'll have me.
Please.
Not to be presumptuous, sorry about that. But they have such a bad rap. And I get it. And it's like the war on the weeds. And honestly, if we just take a minute and take inventory and try to understand like what it is that they're trying to tell us and why they're there, because with a forest fire or a clear cut or whatever, like what is the first thing the land does after that heavy moment of environmental disturbance?
Grows the plants that we call weeds?
Yeah. It's sending up weeds, right? To do the repair. It's thistles. It's like all these things to break up compaction. One of my favorite things is to walk somebody's farm on their aisleways and I can just see where the tractors are, where the tractors have been driving for years because it's just full of dandelions. And then you don't see it elsewhere. You're just like, right, like this is a massive compaction zone. Or same with the Canada thistle. Y'all have Canada thistle where you are?
We do.
Yeah, it's tenacious. And what is it doing? What is the physical properties of that plant, right? It's got this massive taproot, right? It's trying to do something. So as we change conditions, those weeds become more and more obsolete. And that sounds far-fetched and magical. I realize that. I realize it when the words are coming out of my mouth. And yet I see it like again and again and again. And it's not to say that one of the things that I'm seeing at Blue Raven, like now that we're at 10 years, I'm like, oh, like we don't have a lot of problems with most weeds. And I'm starting to see some things creep up because the conditions are right for that, right? We have this like beautiful soil and there's some plants that are like, hey, we love this, So I think this idea of clean beds and like no weeds, like I don't think it's necessarily realistic. And like our goal as growers is like, how do we create an environment where our plants, our crops are out competing? They're stronger, they're more resilient, they're vigorous. There's always going to be some weeds. It's just a matter of like, we don't want that weed competition, right? Yeah.
So, okay, how did you get them to that point where you have almost no pressure? I mean, it can be a short, from the article I gather, the first step is not letting weeds go to seed as much as possible in the first place. And then I'm guessing a lot of tarping, like to smother or keep weeds from sprouting during, I imagine like times when you're not, like shoulder seasons or times when you're not using a bed. It sounds like you kept them covered so that weeds would not grow. Right? Because it sounds like, to somebody who has a lot of weeds, like us, for example, it sounds like a dream to be weed free. But, there's a few farms that I've seen that are really committed. Some of the, not all no-till. I'll say, like some, like the Nordells come to mind. I don't know if you know Ann and Eric Nordell.
Yes, I do.
Yeah.
Yes.
They're not no-till, but they're actually, I mean, they're so interesting because they have a really low till and they do all this horse farming and stuff. Yeah, but I mean, incredible. Like they're an example of someone who's like, I've been to their farm and have seen it, that they just, for one thing, they've been doing it for years. So they've had years of working that weed seed bank down, of just not letting them go to seed. And so it can sound like, I think for people who have a lot of weed problems, it sounds like a fantasy, but I've seen a few places that, are just on top of it and like have almost no weed pressure. So like, can you just tell us what's your weed like, what's your strategy? It doesn't have to be complicated, even if it's just like tarping. Can you just tell us what your strategy is to get to that point?
In the early first few years when weed pressure was high, exactly like as everyone else is doing, just like whatever you do, don't let things go to seed. That's such a massive one. Our commitment to no-till and or minimal till. I'm funny about that word, no-till, because I feel like even transplanting, like that's some level of tillage, or raking can be. I've seen some really aggressive rakers. I'm like, that's a lot of tillage that's happening with your rake, man. But we, in terms of mechanical tillage where we were inverting the soil, we were pretty committed to having that be a bare minimum. I think that it had a really huge impact on our weed pressure. And I noticed that as we progressed and as I got a little older and I got busy and I was like, I want to mechanize a little bit. And I'm like, I'm going to bring out the harrow. And the harrow just does such a great job getting the bed ready for me and I can transplant faster. I really did notice the impact on our soil, like in a negative way. So it's cool to like, at least in our trajectory, really neat to just like be really committed to this idea and then on one extreme and then kind of swing back to the middle and be like, all right, so that maybe isn't realistic. And especially as an educator where I have a lot of folks saying like, hey, like, how do we do this on my farm? How do we do this on 5 acres or 10 acres or 20 acres? And going to no-till is right out of the gate, like tomorrow is like, it's not realistic for a lot of folks. So, but for us, and you asked about Blue Raven, like, I think that was a really big piece. And as I mentioned before, like, it really does have to do with changing the structure of our soil, helping have better aeration, less compaction, better biology, right? So we were creating an environment that just wasn't conducive to a lot of weeds. They just didn't like it. They're like, we don't have any work to do here. If you're thinking about weeds as workers and repairers, they're like, yeah, I don't know. You put us out of a job.
Okay.
Yeah.
Well, that makes sense. And I think that'll be light at the end of the tunnel for people who are dealing with their weeds right now. It's like, just trust the system.
Yeah. And I am working on a 20-acre project right now, and where, tillage has been on the aggressive side for a lot of years. And that was low-hanging fruit, so to speak. When I was advising them, I was like, hey, like, what would that look like? What would that feel like to put that disc in the tractor shed for a couple of years? And what other tools could we use? Could you swap out the disc for the chisel plow? Or, is there a way to cover crop and not disturb that soil for a year or two and see what happens? I mean, in some cases, yeah. So in this case, it's a little bit more complicated, but honestly, Andrew, within seriously like 2 growing seasons of putting the disc aside, I can see massive impacts on the weeds on that 20-acre site. So that feels fast to me and profound.
Right. Yeah, that is a big change. It's big reason for people to try to get a hold of land that they're going to farm at least the year before they want to farm it, right? Because you're saying I agree. Those kind of changes in 2 years, that sounds pretty fast. I also know a lot of people who are like, okay, we got our land, like we're going to farm here next year. Like I know friends, and we've been guilty of just like jumping in too fast. I mean, and sometimes that's what you got to do. You know, if you're like, people sometimes have to change. You might lose access to a parcel of land that was critical, and you need to start growing on a new one. Like, it would be great if we could do cover crops for 5 years, but that's just not always realistic. So
no, not at all.
Yeah. Can you tell us a bit about that? So I know you said that you were working on a 20-acre remediation project with your soil and water conservation district. So tell us a bit about that.
Yeah. So it's a big question. I'm going to try to do it justice. Yeah, so I'm going to give a big shout out to East Multnomah Soil and Water Conservation District. They purchased this large property in 2011. It had been, in 2011, and it had been previously a ball and burlap nursery for 40 years. So a lot of topsoil removal, a lot of herbicides. The weeds are horrendous. I got to finally see pictures of what it looked like when they bought the property, and I was shocked. So Rowan Steele is the site manager for that site, also runs a farmer incubator program off of that land, and has done a phenomenal job, like doing restoration, like up to a point, and just by the book, right? So cover cropping, and like exactly what you described with this, like, how do you exhaust the weed seed bank with mechanical tillage, right? You seed it, you water it, you let it go fallow, you try to encourage more weeds, like rinse and repeat again and again. And they were very successful in getting this site to a place where other farmers were able to come on site and use that land as a stepping stone to grow their business, which is really incredible. And it also just kind of hit this point where the weeds were winning and soil structure was very compromised. And so I contacted Rowan back in 2022, I think. Yeah, fall of 2022, I think it was. And I just said, hey, like, we've been really successful at Blue Raven with soil health. And I'm just curious, are you interested in creating some soil health initiative on this land? And he got back to me within the hour. And I was on site walking the farm with him like later that week. And it took some time for us to kind of figure out what it is that we were going to do and what my role was going to be on that site. And so in fall of 2023, I set up 250-foot transect lines, one on the kind of worst performing area where weeds and compaction were really, really fierce, and one that was considered best performing, where soil, structure was a little better, weeds were a little bit better performing overall. And I did tons of testing. I tested biology, I did physical assessments, testing aggregation and aggregate stability, tested the chemistry, we did leaf tissue analysis, and just started to unravel this puzzle and start to figure out what's going on and why is this soil struggling. And so, I just finished my third season there. And really, we're about 18 months into this restoration project. And we're throwing everything we got at it. We're inoculating seed, we're spraying trace minerals, we're balancing minerals in the soil based off soil testing, and we're reducing tillage and optimizing tillage. So in some places, we're coming through with a big subsoiler, and we put these massive tanks on the back of it and I create this incredible brew of biology. So we're ripping and we're dripping biology down those big rips in the soil, which is really helping to mitigate the compaction at a deeper level. And so that compaction remediation sticks. And what I had heard from Rowan in the past was that they were ripping and then the soil was just like sucking back up and becoming compacted again, like right away. And what we're finding is that we're 3 years in after this rip and drip, and like it's holding, right? It's holding. It's so cool. That biology and carbon it's just such an important piece to the restoration part. So I don't know if I did that justice. It's a lot of moving parts and it's complicated and I feel so stoked to be a part of this project because it's, when you have a piece of land it basically just like hit this point where it's just like not functioning very well. Crops weren't growing very well. They weren't resilient to pest or disease. The weeds were rough, and like 18 months in, like I'm looking at farmers' crops and I'm just like, wow, crops weren't growing like this 3 years ago. Yeah, it's incredible. So cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. It's also good that you have a rhyming name for it, the Rip and Drip, Rippin' and Drippin', because it's always a bonus when you can rhyme or have a cool acronym.
Yes.
So I'm familiar with the idea of like a keyline plow or subsoilers, whatever. So I'm in fact, I think we even have some shanks that we bought on our farm for ripping that have like this little tube going down the back that I think was actually anhydrous ammonia that we would never use. But like, I'm wondering, so you've got basically like you're ripping the soil and dripping. Is it like a compost slurry, or I'm just curious, what are you dripping in there when you're subsoiling?
Yeah, we're primarily a compost extract with some humic acid, which is a really awesome carbon source. What else am I putting in there? That's primarily it. So just biology. That was one of the very first things that I started when I was contracted by the district I was like, let's get a high quality compost pile going. So I started 2 different piles. We have a really beautiful warm windrow going and then a Johnson Sioux. So it's a slow, no turn, high fungal, lots of amoeba, and it's cool. It's cool. Yeah. So really, it just doesn't take much. Low rates of high quality compost.
Oh, that's so cool that you have a Johnson Sioux bioreactor. Actually, I've been wanting to invite him on the pod to talk about that whole thing because I met Mr. Johnson a number of years ago at an Eco Farm conference down in California, and it was one of those like lunchtime, meet him at the lunch table. He probably doesn't even remember me, but I'm sure he listens to the pod. So, Mr. Johnson, I'm gonna invite you. So hopefully we can expand on the Johnson bioreactor in another podcast. But that's really cool that because I can now, that makes so much sense now that you say that about dripping the biology in there, because if you think about it, if you have really compacted poor soil, otherwise you're having to I think the traditional way to incorporate biology or anything would be to moldboard plow or, some kind of plowing where you're inverting soil layers. So you're mixing, but that's a really cool idea of just subsoiling and dripping it in there if you're trying to avoid inverting the soil layers. So
yeah, it's cool.
That's cool.
It's cool. Early in my consulting with the district, I called Rowan up, the site manager. I was like, hey, so I have this idea to mount some tanks on the back of your subsoiler so we could drip biology. And he's just like, done. Like, he was so stoked. And like, we were literally out in the fields the very next, I don't know, it was like 10 days to 2 weeks. Like, it was just rad to see the excitement and response of when you hear something that just clicks and it just resonates. He's like, oh yeah, we're doing that. So we're on our 3rd prototype. The first one was literally trash cans, mounted and bungee cord. And I have pictures. It's awesome. And we're driving the tractor and the slurry sloshing off the back. I'm just like, whatever, just get it in there. And now our system is legit now. It's professional. It's welded. And, we go out there and calibrate it so that we know how much is dripping. It's so awesome. Yeah. We had a system.
That's cool. I hope there's still trash cans back there, but that's good that you,
well, I love to tell the trash can story because you do what you can with what you have. In my farming background, even though I was working for OSU Extension, we were low budget. That farming project was really low budget. We didn't even have power for our greenhouse for starts. So I was starting starts in my basement and schlepping them over to the farm. And, so I love the low level technology because farmers are resourceful. What do you got, right? Farm is just an organized amount of piles, right? Anyway, so you got something in there. So what can you use?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I mean, I think that's what we say. That's all of our articles in the magazine are by farmers because the most innovative people in farming are farmers because
that's right.
They're having to, respond to the vagaries of weather and pests and jury rig stuff and sometimes slap it together without much of a budget on a short term. So I love those kind of solutions that are just born of necessity.
100%.
All right. So the next question that I wanted to ask, I think applies to Blue Raven or this piece of land, which is just, can you tell me how you look at the management of soil in regards to organic matter, pH, and just generally, what does your soil management program look like?
That's a hefty question. I can speak in multiple contexts depending on what site we're talking about. For Blue Raven, this is the longest trial that I've been a part of at 10 years. And I know that our soil was super acidic. When we started, I did 2 lime applications in year 1 and year 2. We haven't applied lime in 9 years. And our pH is just staying at a beautiful 6.7. It doesn't move. It hasn't moved in years. So we're not applying lime, which is really cool. It's less labor, it's less cost. And I just feel like it certainly is a testament to biology working and the soil ecosystem working, right? Which is really awesome. Soil organic matter, kind of the same gig. Like we added compost early on quite a bit in year 1 and year 2, and then we just stopped. So my soil organic matter levels have continued to rise where we started I would have to look back, Andrew, but I'll say we started at like low 5 and now we're at a high 9, which is not insignificant, in 10 years to elevate the soil organic matter levels that much. And, I think the lack of tillage is a huge piece. I'm a big fan of the flail mower, so mowing crops and keeping roots in the ground. So that source of carbon is much more stable than just like leaf material thrown on the top. So that part feels really important. With and I don't know if you're asking about in other farm contexts, it's going to really differ. But, looking at pH and managing pH, I know you're interested in what's new in soil microbiology. And one of the things that I've learned in recent years is that the soil microbiome, the rhizosphere, do you know that word, right? The rhizosphere, that's the biologically active area right immediately surrounding the roots of your plant. That's okay. That's the rhizosphere.
Okay.
And that's where the bulk of your biology is. And that biology will mitigate pH for your plant up to 2 points, up or down. 2 points. That's not insignificant. So I'm much less inclined to recommend the use of lime or calcium carbonate if the pH is close, and especially if it's not needing calcium. So that's one of the things I'm looking at in a soil test is just where's your calcium level? That feels more important to me to add or not to add.
So you're saying if you have good biology, that can make up for pH not being perfect? Is that
Yep.
Okay. All right. I just want to make sure I'm understanding you.
Yeah.
Okay.
And so, I would be, for me, in where I am right now and looking at, soil restoration and building soil ecology, I would be hesitant to recommend lime just to raise pH by a couple of points. If you were close, if you were in a low 6, I'd be like, yeah, you might want to let it ride, especially if calcium levels were sufficient. And I'm sure people are freaking out about hearing that because it's new. But honestly, the research is fairly old. I think it's from the early 90s that literature is from.
Yeah. Okay.
Really, really cool.
And actually, we just had an article about soil pH. Oh, I forget which month, but in the last half of 2025, certainly. So people are thinking about pH. They can go in their magazine subscribers. They can go into the archive and read about that. But that's good to know. Just as far as one less thing you have to do.
Yeah, and it's not to say that pH is not important. It is, right? It is, and it's yet another pretty incredible reminder that microbes got it, right? They've been doing this work for millions of years, right? Who was adding the lime hundreds of years ago or whatever? And, I know our agricultural system is shifted and the environments have changed and when, they become more intensively managed. And it's just important to remember that those organisms are there and they have a job and they've had this job for a really, really long time.
They've got experience. They've got job experience. They've been doing it for a while.
This.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay.
I like to joke. It's just like, what point are we just going to get out of plants' way and just let them do what they do, right? Like this communication that plants and microbes and soil has, it's so dynamic. And you mentioned this big push in education and research and this understanding of soil. And like, we still don't know anything or very little. Like we are just scratching the surface. We still don't really know how plants function completely, because it's so dynamic and it's so complex, the way that just the plant has its own processes, and then it also is directly interacting with this whole other set of organisms, right? And so how do we begin to start to study that? We're just scratching the surface. And you see me just light up, right? Because I just love it. You know, my favorite thing to say is like, I don't know. Nobody knows. We don't know. And I love that. And I think that it's just a really big piece in trusting and listening again. You know, I think I don't want to go, on a rampage here, but I think for so long, farmers have been told that the answer is in a bag of fertilizer or in a pesticide spray or an herbicide spray. And like, where has that gotten us? So I think that as
to be dependent on the companies making the bags and the sprays.
Right. And I think that like one of the beautiful things about that I'm as I learn how little we really know, it feels empowering to me in a lot of ways, because it's giving the answers to the growers, right? That we have to stop and look and ask better questions, ask a lot of why questions. Why is this happening? What's going on? And I feel like that's just something that we haven't done as growers in a long time, and we're going to start getting better at it. I think that's super cool. And I think that farmers are stoked to hear that, because why are they growing in the first place? It's just like to have this connection to food, to land, to whatever.
Yeah.
That's cool.
Yeah, well, and it's very exciting, because I think there are more answers. There's a lot to be learned, clearly. Just you saying like we know nothing. I don't know if you're a Game of Thrones fan or not, but it makes me think of like, you know nothing, Jon Soil. It's like, obviously, yes, I don't. It's a little taking a little bit of a liberty with them, but yeah, like thinking about how little we know, it reminds me of that whole thing that you've probably heard of, like, we know less about the deep ocean than we do about the surface of the moon. It makes me think like we probably know more about the surface of the moon than what's going on in soil. And a lot of it is because, as we've already talked about, the prime movers most of them are invisible to us, right? And so like, I think it's hard. I've heard soil described as a black box. It's like it's hard to like, hey, what's going on in there? Like, you can't see the things that are doing most of the action. It's hard to figure out. So, but at the same time, I'm so glad we're having this conversation. It's so important, because the soil is the engine, of nutrient cycling, of getting nutrients to our plants. And you're right, you can take this whole completely synthetic approach to it, of basically like figure out what your plants need, buy the bags of stuff and put it on, or you can take the approach, which is not as instantaneous, but I was saying, you can get the biology to do the work for you, but you can't just like airdrop the biology. Like, I think that's one of the things, is it takes years to get those systems going. But that's very exciting, because I think we know that as we learn about this stuff, it's going to create opportunities, and it's going to be, I look at the kind of things that you're learning about and working on, and thinking like, well, this is going to lead to answers for people so they can, have on-farm fertility and solve their pest and disease problems and fertility problems, maybe by making the bag a last resort, or without, the dream I know on a lot of organic farms is closing the circle, is like having on-farm inputs and solving your problems on farm. And so I don't want to say like, no shame if there are certain inputs that particularly in the beginning, like I feel like when we were just starting out, we would hear that be like, well, if you're really doing things right, you won't have any pest pressure because everything will be balanced, you won't have any weeds. And it was sort of like, oh, I don't know, I've got pests and I've got weeds, like, am I doing it wrong? And it really is like, well, biological systems take a while. So I want to be really clear about that, so there's no shame of like, oh, like you're buying stuff so you're not a real farmer. But like, particularly these no-till systems, it takes a while, because they're biological systems, unless you're inheriting a working biological system from somebody else, you may have to do what you're doing, create all that biology to get it to work. So I just want to make sure people don't, like, we're not poo-pooing. Like, if you're...
And please don't just go cold turkey.
Yeah.
It's like giving up caffeine. Like, if you've been an avid caffeine drinker for 25 years, like, what's going to happen when you stop? Right? You're going to feel like caca. Can I say caca?
You can say caca. Actually,
Okay.
we do try to keep this a family pod, but I think caca is...
Is that what okay?
Caca is okay.
Yeah, you're not going to feel well, right? And so what do? Like, you go to black tea, and then you go to green tea, and then you cut, like, you got to feather the system. So yeah, I think that there are some advocates out there for no inputs. I am not one of those people. As much as I can sit here and say, like, biology has the answer, do all these things, I'm also a farmer, and we have to figure out, how do we do this work and have a viable life and have this production? So it's this balance. I talk a lot with my clients about, like, low-hanging fruit, like what's easy year one? Like, what are some things that we can do that are really easy? Because you can't necessarily do all the things all the time. It's just not realistic.
Yeah.
So I appreciate your pause on that, because it is such an important message. And I know that there's a lot of folks out there that are like, no inputs, I don't want to put that on my farm, and you shouldn't do that. Or, oh gosh, like the should, it's like the last word that I'll ever use, is you should. It's, farmers are smart and so incredibly intelligent. And yeah, it's just...
Yeah. I mean, because nobody wants to buy more inputs than they have to, because they cost money and take time to apply. But yeah, it's also, I think it's a matter of diagnosing your farm production problems and figuring out how to solve them. I mean, and it may take a while to even reduce the number of inputs, but...
Totally. I'm in year 10, and the goal has been minimal inputs, of course. And I'm just now in year 10 committing to no soil applied nitrogen for this year. And we'll see what happens, Andrew. Like, I don't know. And I'm a big fan of foliar application. So been tinkering around with just a foliar applied nitrogen instead of a soil applied. And so we'll see what happens. So there's workarounds. How do we feather the system?
Let's talk again at the end of the season and talk about how that went.
Yeah.
Okay. I got to ask, because I know we have an audience of curious farmers, what are you using as your foliar applied nitrogen?
Fish hydrolysate.
Okay.
Yep.
Most people are probably know what that is. Okay.
Yeah. Pretty available, which is nice.
Yeah. And now let's take a minute to hear from our sponsors. It's with their generous support that we can bring you the podcast for free. Farmers who partnered with Farmhand grew an average of 63% this year, because it's more than software. Farmhand acts as your business coach and assistant, helping you sell out, save time, and grow smarter. From marketing to fulfillment to customer support, Farmhand pulls real data from what's worked and what hasn't for other farms and turns it into websites that convert, campaigns that sell, and fulfillment systems that give you your time back. Curious what that looks like? Meet the founder, Ari, at farmhand.partners/GFM and see the same insights and support the fastest growing farms rely on every week. That's farmhand.partners/GFM. Seven Springs Farm Supply has been the market gardener's supply company for over 30 years. Their catalog includes a complete selection of organic fertilizers, pest and disease controls, growing mixes, and cover crop seed. Their experienced team is ready to help you problem solve and find the right solution for your farm and your goals. Seven Springs is committed to providing growers with superior products and service because they understand that their success depends on your success. Request a free paper catalog and learn more at www.sevenspringsfarmsupply.com. From December 17th through December 31st, Seven Springs is running its annual winter sale. Use code SNOW10 for 10% off. And now, back to the show. All right, Jen. Sounds like you've made a lot of progress, from the beginning of the farm till now. Can you tell us about something that you're still struggling with on the farm and how you're dealing with that?
Yeah, love that question. Flea beetles?
Oh, yeah.
God, they're the worst.
Yeah, they're
the worst.
They're so hard to control.
They're so tenacious. And that's something that we really struggled with after the heat dome that we had in 2021. The flea beetle pressure seemed to get worse, and I can go into that later. But
Oh, that's interesting.
what's so cool, something really cool happened this last year when this spring flea beetles, they made their grandeur appearance. And it just so happened to fall on the same day that I was planning a trace mineral spray application. So I noticed the flea beetles in the morning. I was like, oh, bummer. I didn't put row cover on. Like this, I don't know what's going to happen. I've seen this go from mild to severe infestations fairly quickly. I just don't know. And so anyway, in the evening, I sprayed a trace mineral spray based off of my soil test. And when I went back the next morning, there were no flea beetles. They were gone. Please explain that. It was wild. I scouted plants looking for them. I was like, where did you go? I went back the next day. So there's definitely, it's such a beautiful thing to see. It's not something that in a year one, like I saw this happen, like I figured out flea beetles, like no way, like I would need to really see this through for many years. So I mentioned this, very anecdotal story, like with some trepidation, but it was so cool. And I just know that yeah, plants have these nutritional requirements, and when they get the nutritional needs met, they are resilient against pest and disease. So that was very, very cool. So yeah, so the flea beetles, I'm struggling with that, and then maybe not struggling with that anymore. I don't know.
So that was last year. So you'll get to try that again
Yes.
this year. Okay, so.
Oh yeah, I'm excited.
Another reason to do a follow-up interview at the end of this season.
Yeah. And I talked about the 20-acre restoration with East Multnomah Soil Water Conservation. Flea beetles have been a really big issue out there as well. And I have them the farmers out there on a every 3-week foliar trace mineral spray application schedule. Mm-hmm. And the flea beetles have been much, much less severe this year. So I'm starting to gather some evidence that nutritional profile of our plants is very, very important. Mm-hmm. We know this. Yeah. But what they're capable of as a result of getting what they need is mind-boggling to me. I love it. So cool.
Yeah, that's really cool. I mean, I'm sure people are probably familiar with the idea that you'll have less aphids if your plants aren't over-fertilized. Like that. I feel like that's the best known example I can think of that sort of like, in that case, over-fertilized plants can actually attract pests. So do you remember what was in the mineral spray that you were doing that day? I mean, I guess I get it. It's not, I think you're not saying like this spray killed all my flea beetles. I think you're saying, or you can have a chance to correct me if I got this wrong. I think you're saying that what you put on helped the nutrient profile of the plant. It was probably better able to fight off the flea beetles. But do you remember what your nutrient spray was that day? Or is it just like something you do throughout the season?
Yeah, for the most part, I'm going to riff it. But I think it is manganese, boron, a little bit of cobalt, a little bit of iron. Oh, molybdenum. Mm-hmm. Such a fan of molybdenum. I can't remember anything else. I think maybe a little bit of copper and zinc as well. So quite a few things. And I want to be really clear that when I have tested tissue analysis, like done a tissue test on our plants, like those are the nutrients that our plants just aren't uptaking in the amounts that we need them to. So we're giving them this extra.
Okay. I was going to ask, because that's a very specific mix. And so are you making that from single element things, or are you a little of this, a little like, do you have multi-nutrient solutions that you're mixing that up with?
For Blue Raven, I use a product that I love. And for The soil water conservation district I contract with, I actually make it from scratch. And it's all raw materials. They're all OMRI approved. And I mix it together and figure it out and do a lot of math and put it in a big barrel. And then it goes out to the farmers. It's really cool.
In a trash can. Not in a trash can anymore.
It is in a trash can.
It is in a trash can.
Yeah, it is in a barrel. I prefer barrel.
Okay. Well, if nothing else, growers will have to take away the best thing to mix up your solutions in is definitely a trash can.
Absolutely.
That's what Jen said right on the podcast. What is the product that you're using at Blue Raven?
Can I say?
Please, yeah. So I remember this from before, actually, Jen. I was asking you about products. And I think you said because you had a university background, maybe you were discouraged from saying the product. So my approach, I'd rather know, because I think people, I'm assuming people who listen to this podcast, they're running their farms. Like, I think they'll get like, okay, we can say this is not an endorsement of this product, but people always want to know, like, oh, what are you using for that? And I mean,
totally.
It sounds like you don't, like, I don't think you'd be talking about it if you didn't like it. So, I mean, we can say this is not a paid endorsement.
Not an endorsement.
Yes,
get a soil test, get a tissue test. Like, please don't just add this to your farm willy-nilly.
Okay, before
all the disclaimers, like, yeah.
But inquiring minds want to know, Jen.
Yeah, so I purchased this from a company called AEA, and it's called MicroPack.
Okay, great.
Yep. So low rates, and it just so happens to fit the nutritional profile that my plants need, which is awesome.
Okay. I'd rather say a brand name and realize that, I've never heard of it or used it, so it's not an endorsement, but it gives people a starting point, right? They can at least, we're not saying this is the best thing in the world, but we're saying, like, if you want to do this kind of thing, you could try it. And if you find something better, let us know. I can say that.
Yeah. I don't know if it's OMRI certified, which is why for the Soil Water Conservation District, I make it from scratch.
Oh, right.
I make a product from scratch from all OMRI certified trace minerals. So anyway, just so everyone knows all the things.
Okay, because you're like organic uncertified or something or like that at Blue Raven.
At Blue Raven, I mean, yeah. Don't get me started. Yeah,
Okay.
I'm not certified. I don't have any of the papers, any of the certifications. I feel like we go so far beyond certification in terms of what we're putting on. But it's all the ingredients from that product are NOP certified. So it just isn't on the OMRI listing per se. And that may change, and I'm sure they're working towards it.
Okay. Well, that's probably a good time to say the old thing is if you're certified, tell your certifier before starting using anything, just to make sure they're good with it. So,
Yep.
Okay. Well, cool. That's something people can look into if they were interested. All right. So I wanted to make sure and talk about your work with Nicole Masters, because that sounded like just a heck of a course. Tell us about that course that you did with Nicole Masters.
Yeah. It was incredible. I essentially hit such a wall in my education, soil education, like 2023. I had larger producers starting to call, starting to email, starting to show up at workshops. And, we're small here at Blue Raven. And it became really obvious that I just didn't know how to scale up what I was doing here. And there was just this newfound eagerness for producers to start shifting and moving that soil health needle on their farms. So that was kind of the beginning of me like, all right, how do I scale up my knowledge? I was feeling really frustrated at the time that most books around soil health were not super helpful for me. I felt like my context was a little different. I wasn't doing this in their region or using their crops, or I didn't have their equipment, or the list goes on. And so, through an incredible array of synchronicities, I discovered Nicole Masters through a good friend of mine. Oh gosh, the story is hilarious. Was at a random conference, met this guy who mentioned Nicole. She forgot. And then she got back to her hotel that night, and there's Nicole on her TV like doing a podcast of some sort. And she's like, so twice in one day, like hearing this name, Nicole Masters. So I end up talking to her 2 weeks later, and she's like, oh, by the way, like, have you heard of this woman, Nicole Masters? She's a powerhouse. And I was like, sorry, Nicole, if you're listening to this, I'm so sorry. But no, I hadn't heard of her yet. She wrote the book For the Love of Soil. I just went down the rabbit hole listening to every podcast that I could of her, to the point that I started dreaming in a New Zealand accent, Andrew. That's how deep I went. And what I loved about her was her style of education really was in line with how I educate. And everything that I listened to her, everything that I read, I ended up with more questions. So many questions. So like silly me. I'm like, well, I'm going to take this course and get the answers. Yeah, well, it doesn't work that way. But what this course taught me was to rethink how I approach soil health. And that soil health is so incredibly contextual that no two farms are going to be the same. Shoot, maybe even two sides of your farm may not be the same. And how you approach that is going to be really different. So I traveled to the UK twice to be with this incredible cohort that was producers from around the world. Yeah, it was incredible. And we talked a lot about grazing. We talked a lot about human health, microbiology, chemistry, plant physiology, and also how to communicate the needs of the soil to producers, to farmers, which is no bed of roses, I guess, in all aspects of that phrase. Like, it's beautiful and it's a little prickly at the same time, because yeah, I think growers want answers, really concrete answers. And it isn't that simple, unfortunately. There's so much context. And yeah, so that was that course. So definitely a huge, massive deep dive in all things agroecology, ecology, farming, soil. Like I mentioned all the things already. So yeah, I'm a little bit at a loss for words, because I think it just really helped me to reframe how I approach all things soil, from just asking better questions, a lot of why is this happening? Why is this on your farm? What's going on? To, how to do this on a large scale. And we talked a lot about grazing, but there's also a lot of really great work being done on 100 acres to 1,000 acres with compost extracts or small rates of high quality compost. The trace mineral sprays are pretty incredible if you get it right and you're applying correctly in the right amount and timing and all of those things. It's this multifaceted approach to soil health, which I love. The management piece is really, really important. And look, I think you asked me about low hanging fruit before. It's like, that low hanging fruit is often in the hands of the producer, in terms of like, what's the management that is causing there to be a bottleneck in this system.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, first of all, I'll say Nicole is great. I mean, I know of her. I heard her do at least one, if not multiple interviews on the No-Till Growers podcast. So that's where I first heard about her. And she's one of those people, I listened to her interview and she really stood out. I was like, wow. Like, she just was talking about soil health and some stuff that I'd never heard anybody say before. So that's why when you said you were going off to study with her, I was like, I can see why you would want to. So one thing you said just now resonated with me, and that's how it's different. It's so different depending on location, soil, climate, and all those kinds of things, which is something we struggle with in a way with the magazine and the podcast, right? Because most of our subscribers are in the US or Canada. But that's a huge, that's a huge, that's almost like, that's pretty much a range from Arctic to desert and, all different manners of soils in between, right? So, that's one thing, because we realize we have this diverse audience where solutions are not one size fits all. So if somebody's out there listening to this and thinking like, okay, so how do I start assessing, like, is the first step a soil test? Right? If these aren't one size fits all solutions of like, how does somebody get started on what's the first step and maybe first few steps of improving their soil management on their farm, regardless of where they are?
I love that question. The first thing that I do when I'm working with a grower on their farm, that's like another big piece of this, is I realized that at some point I was like, I think I'm doing people a disservice by hosting workshops at Blue Raven, because they're trying to then go to their place and mimic what we're doing, and it doesn't work that way. So I stopped and I was like, all right, I'm going to start coming. I'm just going to start doing site visits. And the first thing that I do is I dig a hole with the producer. I dig so many holes, Andrew. Oh my gosh. Watch your step. I try to fill them in afterwards, but there is so much we can learn from digging holes. We can see how the roots are growing or not growing. We can see if there's biology on those roots in the form of rhizosheaths. We can see if there's compaction. We can see how the aggregation is or isn't. I'll do an infiltration test with water in a cylinder and try to see how the water is moving or not moving. These are tests. This is a test that takes me, if I'm working with a producer, it takes me longer, but on my own, I can run through a series of visual soil assessments in 30 minutes. With a producer, it probably takes closer to an hour, and we learn so much. And then I'll take them to a fence line, a place where it hasn't been in production, and we'll dig another hole, another hole, and assess and see. And you should see the way that folks will light up in terms of like, wow, so this fence line that hasn't been in production for X number of years, this is like how my soil is supposed to look? And the answer is yeah, and you can get it back there. So everything from hole number one is this like big, it's a massive moment in understanding what's happening in their context, which I love that. So that's one. And yeah, so sending samples to the lab. I have a multifaceted approach to analyzing soil health and helping move producers into, a more positive, for soil to start to improve. And so we're doing just a standard chemical analysis that you usually do. We're doing a biological test. So I mentioned the PLFA before. You can add a Haney test onto that. The PLFA is a biological test that's done every 3 years. So yeah, there's some cost to that. And it's only every 3 years. So it's a really nice benchmark. And the Haney test will give you a good indication of how well your soil is functioning. So that's a good one. And then a leaf tissue analysis to round it all out. Because we know with a traditional chemical soil analysis that you send to the lab, that it makes me laugh, because we get these numbers back. And honestly, like, that doesn't mean anything. It doesn't mean that your plants are capable of pulling up those nutrients and utilizing them or the microbes are. So the only way we really know what your plants are taking up is through tissue. So I look at all those things and just try to see. So yeah, I am doing soil balancing with producers if something is really low. With smaller scale producers where compost applications are really high, I'm starting to be like, hey, like, let's hold back on compost for a while. And folks are stoked. So like, oh, you mean I don't have to apply and like bucket this out or whatever it is? I see, folks who are using a lot of compost, phosphorus and potassium levels are very, very high. We talked a lot about weed pressure. High potassium is a recipe for a lot of broadleaf weed species. You see that correlation again and again. So if I see a really high potassium level, oftentimes I don't even have to ask, but I do, of course. I'm just like, are you adding compost or manure? And, I already know the answer because I can see it on their test. And it's like, oh yeah, like we add this or that. And I'm like, okay, hold off. So I don't know if that answers your question, but it helps to give a much clearer picture to dig those holes and to do some investment into sending soil to a lab and having somebody who knows what they're looking at and help you analyze it so that you get what is necessary for your specific context in your farm.
Yeah. Okay. No, those sound like the way that you would develop customized recommendations.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, because that's what I know that I've always been told that if you get your phosphorus levels adequate, to stop applying compost and apply other things to add the nutrients that you need, just because that's typically what happens, is that when people apply a lot of compost every year, that phosphorus becomes overloaded typically first, maybe I know you said potassium too. And once again, that's one thing of just like, if you don't have to apply it then anymore, why go to the trouble of making it or acquiring it and then going to the trouble of acquiring it? Because I know you said that you got your organic matter levels to stabilize 9-ish% or something by, I think, initial compost applications, but it sounds like you're now just like, is it that you're not applying compost, but it's like you said, you're flail mowing? Is it like, it's not that there's no organic matter coming into your beds anymore? It sounds like it's just the amount that's going on from, say, flail mowing is kind of like keeping a homeostasis or something. Because organic matter is great, but I've heard people say that once they got up into the like 10% or something, it's so fluffy, it's almost like the plant, like it's too fluffy, like the plants may not be well anchored in the soil anymore. Like there's, like most things in life, you can get too much of a good thing.
Yep.
Yeah, well, that all makes sense. And so, because that's something you do now, right? Is you people in your region, you will go, like, if people can call you and you'll come out to people's farms and help them do the assessment that we're talking about, right?
Yes. So excited. And I think that was like another, I know when I first reached out to the Soil Water Conservation District, my message was like, how can I help? Right? Producers are struggling with climate extremes and weeds and pests and diseases. And there's so many folks that are just really hungry for getting a little extra support. So it makes me so happy to go hang out with other farms. And, as a farmer, I have a lot of empathy in the hardships of what does this change look like, and making recommendations that are going to be feasible for somebody in a year 1, in a year 2, in a year 3, based off of what their production is or what their income is or what other barriers they might be facing.
Okay, well, that right there might be, is a very important idea. I think of just that since there are very few one-size-fits-all solutions in agriculture, the question becomes, how do I find what solution fits my farm, my climate and soil and all that kind of stuff? So I think that's very useful as far as like hearing what kind of sort of like diagnostic tools, or you would use to go evaluate, figure out where somebody should start. All right, so in the interest of low-hanging fruit, correct, because we've already been talking for a long time, do you have any low-hanging fruit that you would want to pass on to people? I can suggest things, like I know, like from your article, for example, I know you had really bad insect pest pressure. Like I think in your article you talked about cabbage moths, aphids, brown marmorated stink bugs, so like I don't know if you want to talk about, I'm not sure if it's, and I know you talked about that pressure coming down over time, so I don't know if you want to pick a topic like insects and talk about how you got that pest pressure to come down, or may have been different solutions for different insects, although I also know you were doing a lot with trying to encourage beneficials and things like that, so I don't know if there's a blanket solution like that or if there's other hanging fruit that you want to talk about. But is there anything, if people are listening to this interview thinking, what are the low-hanging fruit that they can pick on their farm? Are there any like go-to solutions that you'd like to talk about?
Yeah, I love that question. Where do I start? I think right out of the gate, tillage comes to mind. And I want to be really sensitive because I don't want to be dogmatic about that. And there is no reason to be dogmatic. And it really comes back to this whole concept of it's all contextual. And I feel like, I think there's a time and a place for tillage. And I think that if you are in a place where you are tilling maybe a little more aggressively than you would like to, how can you lessen how many passes you are taking each year? That's like a really nice goal. Or can you do an equipment swap where instead of the tiller, which is inverting soil, you're using something like the chisel plow instead. And I know that they're different, or maybe swapping out for a power harrow or something like that, which is stirring soil versus inverting soil. So there's some things like that, it's just like, how can you switch management in a way that you still have the production that you need and are able to get your transplants in the ground and have a viable business and slowly start moving the soil health needle, right?
Yeah.
So that one is good. And, I think that, tillage can go on both sides of the spectrum. I talk a lot about I always go back to this idea of this dogma of no-till. I'm not sure, it got really intense out there for a while where it's just no-till, if you till, you're not doing it right. And I've seen firsthand growers who have a mindset like this that are trying to not do till, which I get, yes, it's hard on the soil. And they have this compaction layer that's 4 to 6 inches under the ground. And they just struggle. They struggle. And it's so hard to see. So in that scenario, bringing in some well-planned tillage is going to just be so advantageous. So I think that part's really important. Assessing compaction is something that, along with digging holes, I'm assessing compaction all the time. One of my favorite tools is a penetrometer. I wrote an article for Growing for Market about the penetrometer. It's the tool that I wish that I had 15 years ago when I first started farming. It's so useful in helping us figure out what our plant roots are capable of penetrating. Because, I've always just used my finger and just feel the soil. How does it feel, right? Well, plants can penetrate 150 to 200 pounds per square inch. That's so intense. It's so wild and so impressive to me. And I think that because of that, and because maybe folks don't have a good tool on farm to really measure that level of compaction, that there maybe is some over cultivation happening, right? So I don't know. Those are pieces of low-hanging fruit, I would guess. You mentioned pest and disease. Low-hanging fruit that we incorporate on our farm is just trying to have as much diversity as throughout the farm. So a good example, if I'm growing in a bed of brassicas, there's 2 rows of brassicas within that bed. The brassicas are spaced, 12 to 18 inches apart, depending on what they are. And then down the middle, I'm putting a multi-species cover crop, just one line with so one of those crops would be flax, because flax is really incredible at having mycorrhizal relationships, and brassicas aren't. So it's like a placeholder where you're holding that mycorrhizal space while you have a non-mycorrhizal plant growing. So it's just a cool way to how do we keep that biology going throughout? And then I throw some other things in there. I'm a big fan of flax, big fan of oats. What else do I love? Oh, I've started playing with fenugreek, which is a legume, but it's pretty low growing and not very aggressive. So it has to be, I've played around with these interplantings for so many years. And what it boils down to is it's got to be manageable, right? You can't have it overtake your crops, and it's got to just kind of be there and contributing rather than causing you a headache.
Yeah, it's got to work in the context of the overall farm.
Absolutely.
Well, that's a really cool idea of having almost like a banker plant in the bed. I know they use that in greenhouses. I've seen this thing where they'll put in a big tomato greenhouse. You probably have seen this. I'm going to describe this for the benefit of our audience because I see the analogy here. So I've seen something they'll do in greenhouses. It's not in long rows of tomatoes. They'll have sometimes a pot of grass, or sometimes barley. They'll even plant it in the ground and they'll inoculate it with a barley aphid, right? Because the idea is that barley aphids don't get on tomatoes or the other greenhouse crops. And so it seems counterintuitive to be putting aphids into a greenhouse, but they plant the barley in the greenhouse, put the barley aphid on the barley, and then that aphid will not go up to the crop plants. And so the idea is that when if your beneficials have done such a good job that they've eaten the aphids off of your crop plants, they can come and eat aphids off of the barley because they know that without getting the barley aphids on the rest of the crops. And so sounds like what you're doing is you have a banker crop in there that will have a mycorrhizal association, because I remember that now, saying like it's not worth it to inoculate brassicas because they don't have the mycorrhizal association that most plants do anyway. So that's a really cool thing that I have not heard of doing before. So you can feed your mycorrhizae even when you don't have a cash crop that wants to feed them.
That's right. Yeah. Okay. 100%. Yeah. Nailed it.
Cool.
That's cool about the greenhouse aphids. I'd never heard that before.
Yeah. It's pretty cool strategy. I think people are doing. One thing I did want to ask you about was, I know you said that your high organic matter in your soils hold a lot of water that helps your crops survive those heat domes that I've heard about. We actually had a really hot summer this past year, but I don't think we've really gotten the heat domes like you're getting up there in the Pacific Northwest, where there's just like a layer of hot air that just sits there for days and days. But I think you said that you think that the organic matter in your soil helped your crops survive a heat wave when the irrigation was broken. But I think there have been some significant heat domes in the Pacific Northwest over the past 5 years since you wrote that article. So how are you dealing with those heat domes that seem to be getting more and more frequent?
So, the big heat dome we had in 2021 was right on the heels of the pandemic. It's the closest I've ever come to quitting farming at the end of that season. Yeah, it was rough.
It must have seemed, it's like, and the end times are upon us, COVID, and now I think I know the one. Like, I think that's the heat dome that I learned the term heat dome, and then it seems like they're coming back. But they're rough times.
I don't remember exactly, but I think we hit 118 degrees here.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah, so it was like get up at 4, try to farm as much as you can, and then like it was already in the high 90s by like 9 a.m.
Oh my gosh.
It was bonkers. And so our soil organic matter didn't matter at that point.
Doesn't matter when it's 118 degrees.
Yeah, our soil got cooked. And also the timing of that event, it was late June. And I don't know about you on the East Coast, but for us, at least out in the field, like we're kind of late to the party, and the canopies aren't completely closed up. So plants are in the ground, like we're in full swing, but there was a lot of bare soil, even though everything was planted. And what happened was our soil got really hydrophobic after that event. And it took me a long time, years. So, and this was not just for 2021 after the heat dome. It went on for years. I would irrigate and then dig in the soil, and the soil just still felt dry. I was like, I don't even understand.
Oh, so it really did cook your soil.
It cooked our soil, yeah. And it wasn't until I listened to a podcast about forest fires and soil remediation after forest fires that this researcher was like, so like there's this waxy substance, like when organic matter gets too hot and gets fried and microbes fry, that there's this waxy substance that coats your soil particles, and it's hydrophobic. And I'm like, oh, that's what's happening.
Yeah.
So I had to figure that out. How do you remedy that? And I made a concoction of worm extract tea to try to just add a whole bunch of biology to try to break those waxy coatings down. And then I went into a full year of cover crops. So I took Blue Raven out of production and did a full season of cover cropping with multi-species cover crops that had never been grown here. Oh my gosh, the soil just loved it. It was really so much fun to see. And so 2025, the season we're just coming out of, is the first year we're back into production after that full season of cover cropping. And the soil is holding moisture so well. I'm like, yes,
It works.
It's really cool. So cool to see. And, I mean, you could say, oh, well, it's just a one-off or it wasn't hot enough. But, I feel like I have bragging rights at this point. I'm like, well, I've been managing the soil for 10 years. Like, I feel like I have a good sense of how it should be functioning, or when there's those alarm bells start to go off where I'm like, something's not right, And so really, really cool to see it come back. And I'm like, wow, this is really cool to see the soil holding so much water for a long period of time.
Well, yeah, and that you fixed that problem that was caused by the heat dome. So that's clutch. I mean, I'd never heard of that. I mean, that's really interesting. I've also never grown on a place that's been burned over, as far as I'm aware.
Yeah.
So.
It's intense to think like when you have to start thinking outside the box on your farm of like, oh yeah, this is the equivalent of a fire coming through our farm and affecting our soil. And I don't know what other producers have dealt with that. If it was just us, like we have pretty high clay, like clay, as you know, when it gets hot, it really dries up very, very quickly. So again, I don't know how many times can I say context during this conversation, but yeah, it's cool we figured it out. I wish I had figured it out sooner. Better late than ever. It's a cool story to share.
Well, and it's nice that you were able to take a break. So, I mean, what did you tell your CSA members, like, we're taking a break this year? Was a year off from the CSA?
I did.
Okay.
Yeah, I did. And it was really, I finished with Nicole May of 2024. And yeah, I basically took a sabbatical to assimilate all of that knowledge and just sit on it and be like, gosh, like what's next? It was so overwhelming. It's 8 months long, 20 hours a week, and very, very, very intensive. And my brain just felt like it was going to there was moments. I know we're backtracking because you already asked me about the class, and
it's all relevant.
Oh my gosh. But like for so many months, I just sat like almost in this like trying to rehearse and like remember all of the elements all of the time, juggling balls, right? Like keeping them all up in the air, because I felt like if I dropped one, it stopped thinking about one element of soil, the whole thing was going to collapse because it was all so new and so fascinating. So anyway, yeah, I needed to take some time. I scrapped all of my old curriculum. I've been an educator for 15 years, and I started over. I started rewriting curriculum based off of new research, new data, and a new way of thinking. And how can I better support the growers in our region?
Mm-hmm. Well, yeah. Wow. And that's really cool that you're able to do that, and also that you had the mindset to be like, okay, I've learned new stuff. I'm going to start over. And that you could cover crop the whole farm too. Because, that reminds me of another strategy that we got from the Nordells, which is to cover crop like half of your available fields. Because, like, I think a lot of people who are particularly certified organic, because you have to have a crop rotation plan, right? A lot of people will have like a 5-part or 6-part rotation, each, like the field divided up into 5 or 6 parts based on, let's say, 5 crop families, and maybe one block gets cover cropped and they just rotate them through every year. Well, the example, when we moved to this farm where we are in Maine, we had a like 2 or 3 acre field that we had the use of that first year, but we didn't need to grow on the whole thing. And so the idea that we took from the Nordells was to cover crop half it. Like I think we prepared an acre for actual vegetable production, and then just cover cropped the rest of the field, right? And my point is that we were able to cover crop 50% of our land instead of cover cropping like 15 or 20% of the land as it would be in a 5 or 6 part rotation, right? And so, because I know like what we were moving on to was a very rundown hayfield. It need a lot of help. And so, because the point being, if you can, I realize it's a luxury because you have to have more land. If you have the luxury of growing on more land than you actually need, if you have the luxury of access to more land than you need, it can be a way to really speed up the improvement of that land, right? To to say, we said, well, we don't need this whole other acre, so we're just going to cover crop the whole thing. And then the next year we flipped all of our production onto the cover cropped acre, which grew so much better than the land that we grew on the year before that had prep, but I don't think it even had a full year of cover crops. And so that's just you saying about cover cropping your whole farm for a year made me think of that. Wanted to throw that out there. Like, that's one of my best tips. If people are getting started or have land that has been abused or just is not growing the way it used to, if you can grow on half of it, cover crop half of it, the half that you're cover cropping is going to get in better shape so much faster than if you're trying to cover crop most of it. It just made me think of that. So
yeah, it's wild. I agree with you. And I think we could add that to the low-hanging fruit question, right? And there's a technical piece to that cover crops for some reason can be a hindrance, and it's taking part of the land out of production, or it's a cost piece, it's a labor piece, it's a how do you get into it afterwards piece. Like, there's a lot to it. And I agree with you that the impact is so profound. And as a small producer for a lot of years, cover crops were, I was growing 4 seasons, and cover cropping was tough. I tried to mitigate it the best I could with intercropping. I'm like, well, but goodness, yeah, nothing like seeing land come out of a full year of cover crop. It's been really cool to see just how well crops are responding. And maybe most importantly and most profoundly to me was the resilience to pest and disease that we saw. I mean, we've always had that, but way more this year. I'm like, wow, like there just isn't any, there's no blight, there's no nothing, it's really, really cool.
Yeah, it can help so much. I mean, like, here we are, end of December. I figure it's probably too late for people in most of the US or Canada to get a cover crop on, but maybe people in the deep South, if they have gotten access to, let's say, a new piece of land that they're going to grow on next year, if you can throw a cover crop on that land, it's like even not a full year, even if you can just throw a winter cover crop on it in the fall, get it to grow over the winter and then incorporate it, it's going to grow so much better than if it just sits over the winter.
You'll have happy soil microbes.
Yeah. Maybe that's a good low-hanging fruit to end on, because you've been very generous with your time. I can also tell you're very passionate about this, so that probably helps sustain the energy. But we've already been talking for a good long while. I'm sure we could go on, but maybe let's just have you back next fall. And because that seems like a pretty good place, unless I did want to invite you to ask you if there was anything I should have asked you about, or that you'd like to tell us about before we let you go.
I feel like we covered so much. I feel good.
Yeah,
how do you feel?
I think we covered a lot of ground. This is like a good solid, like 2-hour listen for people. They can listen to this, digest over the season, and then we'll have you back next fall or winter when your season has calmed down a little bit. You can tell us about your continuing adventures with foliar feeding and not applying soil nitrogen and all this stuff. So, okay.
Awesome.
Cool.
Thank you so much.
This was fun. For our audience, where can they find you online or on social media or wherever you want them to look you up?
Yeah, we have a website, blueravenfarm.org. Social media is blue_raven_farm. We had just Blue Raven Farm, and somebody stole or pirated I don't know, what do you call that? When somebody steals your site.
Oh.
They turned it into, somebody stole Blue Raven Farm, and they turned it into pirate jewelry. So if you get to the pirate jewelry, that's not us.
That's not you.
We're not the pirate jewelry, Blue Raven Farm. So blue underscore Raven underscore farm.
Okay, that's good. Yeah. So people
clunky. So bummed. It's like, goodness.
Yeah, that stinks.
Couldn't you take pirates.com or something? I don't know, Yeah,
pirate jewelry. That would be a lot more straightforward, I think. Piratejewelry.com.
Yeah. Anyway.
Okay. Well, in that case, yeah, this has been fun. I'm fascinated by soil, both because it's interesting, like all the critters, but also because it's so important for growing plants well. So, but I don't really know that much about it. So I really enjoyed this conversation. Appreciate you telling us all about it, Jen. So
Thank you.
Thank you so much. And for all you do, you're awesome. I just really enjoyed this conversation so much. And so we'll let you go, but let's do this again sometime.
Thank you so much. So much fun. You're awesome. Thank you for all that you do as well. Appreciate you.
All right. Thanks, Jen. And happy growing and good luck putting all that newfound knowledge to use this coming season. Take care.
Bye.
Thank you for joining us for this episode of the Growing for Market podcast. If you've been enjoying the show, please consider giving us a follow and a rating or a review. It really helps others find the podcast. For more tips and tricks from farmer to farmer, check out our magazine at growingformarket.com. Whether you're a commercial grower or just want to grow like one, subscribe to Growing for Market magazine for the nitty-gritty of growing, marketing, and the business of market farming. We publish 10 issues per year with articles written by experienced farmers on topics ranging from tools and techniques to farm business operations and marketing. If you've been listening to the Growing for Market podcast and haven't yet checked out Growing for Market magazine, we've made a change so you can try the magazine for free. We've added a free month to the beginning of all first-time subscriptions. Try out the digital or paper magazine for a month, and if it's not for you, cancel within 28 days and you'll never even get billed. All subscriptions get you a year of the magazine, plus 150 downloadable back issues from the last 15 years and over 1,700 archived articles. With digital subscriptions starting at just $39 a year, head on over to growingformarket.com and subscribe today to benefit from over 3 decades of writing by farmers, for farmers in Growing for Market magazine.